The first major battle, really, of the Revolutionary War actually occurred before we ever even declared our independence in 1776, and it was at Lexington Concord, April 19th, 1775. British troops had been sent out from Boston in order to capture John Hancock and Samuel Adams, whom they considered the rebel leaders. But they were also going to destroy ammunition and military supplies that had been stashed in Lexington and Concord. Patriots had been sent out to warn what was going to happen. Paul Revere, William Dawes, they headed to Lexington, but it was actually Samuel Prescott who wound up being the one who went to Concord. However, there was also a black patriot, Wentworth Cheswell, who rode north to New Hampshire to warn them that the British were on the move. There were many black militiamen and Minutemen who began to convene in Lexington and Concord. One of them perhaps might have been Lemuel Haynes. We don't know if he was actually involved in the conflict itself, but the very next day he did join with other militiamen as they harassed the British all the way back to Boston. Prince Estabrook fought in Lexington Concord, Peter Salem, Cuff Whitmer, Isaiah Bayouman, and several others. Also, as the British troops were approaching Boston, a black patriot named David Lampson actually led a group to attack the British and at West Cambridge, and they were able to secure part of their supply team. The next battle, very next month, May 10th, 1775, they were able to capture Fort Ticonderoga. Ethan Allen led the Green Mountain Boys, showing up there at the fort and declaring in the name of Jehovah and the Continental Congress that they needed to surrender, which they did. Lemuel Haynes was involved in that, Barzillai Lou, and Primus Black, Ephraim Blackman. The importance of this capture: that fort had over 200 cannon, howitzers, and mortars. All of those were transferred to Boston, eventually being set up on like Dorchester Heights, that it led to the British finally leaving Boston. The very next month we have Bunker Hill, June 17th, 1775. Dozens of black patriots were there involved in that. Cuff Whitmer, Barzillai Lou, Jude Hall, Salem Pour, Peter Salem, to name just a few. Peter Salem, in fact, is credited with shooting British Major John Pitcairn. Now, Pitcairn had led the British troops going to Lexington and Concord. By his shooting Pitcairn, it helped the Patriots escape. They had run out of ammunition and needed to get out of there. Salem Pour is credited with killing Lieutenant Colonel James Abercrombie. He's the only soldier after the Battle of Bunker Hill that was commended by 14 officers for his bravery. And then Jude Hall. He ended up being nicknamed Old Rock for his bravery, not just there at Bunker Hill, but later on at Trenton, Saratoga, and Monmouth. This moves us along to the Battle of Trenton and Princeton. Now, morale was really low here among the American troops. They had lost Long Island. Washington had had to sneak his troops off of Manhattan. They needed a victory. A lot of his troops were actually, their enlistments were up at the end of December. He was going to end up basically with no army. So he needed to have a win to encourage patriots to re-sign up or to join. So he plans this surprise attack on the Hessians at Trenton. So in the crossing of the Delaware, of course, there's the famous painting, Washington crossing the Delaware, and there is a black man who was part of the rowing team, rowing Washington and the troops across. That is believed to have been Prince Whipple, who was actually an aide to General William Whipple, who was part of Washington's forces. But there were other people as well: Isaac Walker, Oliver Cromwell, Primus Hall. In fact, Cromwell said, "We knocked the British out lively at Trenton and Princeton." And then Primus Hall single-handedly tracked and captured a whole group of British soldiers. Then we move on to the Battle of Rhode Island, August 28, 1778. General James Varnum had been at the Battle of Red Bank and seen the incredible performance of black soldiers there. He then recommended to Washington and then eventually to the Rhode Island Assembly, "We've got to form some black troops." So eventually they did. The Rhode Island Assembly, February 14th, called for the enlistment of blacks, mulattoes, Indians, and guaranteed their freedom if they chose to fight. So consequently, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment ended up having a couple of units of black soldiers. This became very important in the Battle of Rhode Island because it is these black soldiers who repulsed overwhelming forces of Hessians 3 times, even though they were drastically outnumbered. Finally, we have the Battle of Cowpens, January 17, 1781. Here we have blacks who had come to join Brigadier General Daniel Morgan, Record Primus, Fortune Freeman, and 13 others. They ended up routing Lieutenant Colonel Bloody Bannister Tarleton. This man had been known for mercilessly killing surrendered troops, burning churches, burning villages, just out of meanness. Tarleton was completely shocked that he was routed. And when he and several of his cavalrymen were leaving, he chose to turn around and personally attack Colonel William Washington, a second cousin of George Washington. Washington was actually pursuing Tarleton. He didn't want him to get away. So they ended up having kind of a sword saber fight on their horses. William Washington's saber is broken. Another British officer was going to come up behind him and kill him. A young black bugler that we do not know the name of saw what was happening and pulled out his pistol and shot the officer in the shoulder, preventing him from killing William Washington. It forced the capture of some of those British, and Tarleton and some of the rest of them were able to get away, but Tarleton ended up leaving the country. So these are just highlights of some of the black contributions in these battles. They fought in every single major battle that was going on in the Revolutionary War. And the key thing to remember here, they were fighting for the principles of our Declaration. It is very important that we remember their contributions.